The little things, the little things. This month's theme has been transformation. It could mean society, it could mean organization, church, family, individual, relationship, just about anything, I suppose. Or it could be a bunch of those things working together and against each other at times, all at once. Now, I'm no expert on transformation, but I trust you can see some of it in my mini stories, and you can be the judge and make your own conclusions. In 1983, I was asked to interview at a church in White River Junction, Vermont. The denominational executive told me it was a down on its luck church in a largely abandoned downtown. For 20 years, he said, they've reported 800 members. Nobody's ever cleaned up the rolls. Well, what's the average on Sunday worship? I asked. 28. 28, he said. So their membership is probably 150 or less, I said. What else is there for activity? Well, not much, he said. No Sunday school, no youth group, buildings not handicapped accessible. The sanctuary is 10 feet above the street level, and down lower in the dining room, that's 10 feet below the street level. Empty 1960s education building out back is all cobwebbed and largely abandoned. It's 6 or 8 rooms and a basement. Oh, and the steeple blew off in 1962 when they never replaced it. Aren't you executives supposed to accentuate the positive? I joked. Well, yeah, here's one, he said. They just sold the old parsonage and they upgraded to a split level in a safe residential area, 2 blocks from the middle and the high school. The executive knew that I had a 12-year-old daughter going into 8th grade, and this was the carrot on the end of the stick. Why'd you use the word safe residential area? He said, well, there was no choice but to move the parsonages. Motorcycle gang scared the pastor off after a year. This executive, boy, he really knew how to sell it. So in June, my wife and I drove 5 hours from Bangor and met with the search committee, the 2 of us in our 30s, the 6 of them in their 50s and 60s. We gathered around an 8-foot church supper table, not a round table, but an 8-foot church supper table like it was a deacon's meeting. The chairperson was named Ira. He had a loose leaf binder and a companion guidebook in front of him. I had seen it before, one of those packaged, any church can do it, one-size-fits-all church growth programs. It came complete with form letters to mail to your target audience. Good word, huh? Target audience, middle-class working people. Committee assignments for an aging church with 28 at worship. Action timelines for the campaign, and for the pastor, pre-written sermons to preach to your own excited congregation the month before the target Sunday, plus a humdinger sermon for the Sunday the curious target audience would swarm in to see what the buzz was all about. In the 1970s and 80s, the church growth movement was a force. It sold a lot of those loose leaf binders and kits. Then there was Maxine, the church's oral history carrier. She laid down a dog-eared scrapbook and a packet of Polaroid photos that she used to give a recap of the 1959 youth group that had 60 kids, by God. And that was about the number in my high school graduating class. She pointed at kids and she named names from 1959, 1960. 6 were hers, 4 were her sister-in-laws, 3 were another relatives. I'm doing the math here and the percentages. Maxine was a force who yearned to recreate the past. Newcomer Joe was there, and he talked of being saved and speaking in tongues and being a washed in the blood, born-again Christian. What the church needed was old-fashioned hellfire and brimstone preaching and altar calls, by God. But church growth in a box Ira and return to the past Maxine and altar call Joe were not the only forces in the room, I realized. I didn't realize it then. There was me and my own ambition, a young pastor with a need to produce results. At 34, I probably needed to prove something to my former classmates. Yeah, we were competitive. And my parents, and my old home church. I didn't see that then, but it was there. Maxine fanned out her deck of Polaroids like she was calling gin and started her history lesson. I had nothing to lose, so I seized the teaching moment and countered with my own short sociology lesson. I asked the group, what were society's major driving forces in the 5 years before and after Maxine's youth group pictures here? Blank faces, until a woman named Dee, God love her, a woman named Dee said, the post-war baby boom. We were spitting out kids like we were Pez dispensers. Parents needed a place for them, right? I asked. That's when public schools expanded, little leagues exploded, and churches like this one built education buildings in record numbers. You parents of the baby boom were the church growth movement. We discussed it briefly. And here's force number 2, I said. What was going on politically? Dee, who was very sharp, said, Eugene McCarthy's witch hunts, the blacklists, rooting out communists. Right, I said. And how could you show that you were a loyal American? Join a church? Dee guessed. Raise your right hand. Exactly, I said. Mainline church ministers got evangelism awards left and right. But was Reverend Smith really a persuasive preacher? Or was he simply holding the tiller steady when the wave came over the bow with a baby boom? Dee said, so McCarthy got more people into church than Billy Graham. Probably, I said. Examine your membership records for then. Who joined? Large numbers of men joined, unlike generations and decades before, plus their wives. And who else? All those post-war kids who became 12 and 13-year-olds in the youth groups here and in confirmation classes. They were sworn in record numbers, raising their right hand to please their parents. Until both the kids and the parents drifted away, Dee said. Well, I wanted to sing, where have all the members gone? But my point was already well made. It was satisfying to me to think that I had stimulated them so much in our first meeting together. But retro Maxine did not give in easily, and she argued, problem is, we don't have the blue laws anymore, so Sundays are no longer sacred. Born-again Joe muttered, we should honor the Sabbath. And Church Growth Ira added a strange comment, no liquor sales on Sundays. That's when Dee unofficially shifted into the position of chairperson. A little education had empowered her. Look, she said, whether we're for it or against it, it's a fact. The blue laws are in the past and families have options other than church. This was a good learning experience for me. Thank you, Reverend Burt. When enough heads nodded, she asked, well, now, what do we do in 1983? Well, I said, here's my concise definition of ministry. They grabbed their pens and paper, ready to write it down in case there was a quiz later. I said slowly, ministry is meeting needs in a context by applying human, financial, and other resources, period. I paused then, and I said, let me just ask you this. What do you call that structure attached to the back of this main building? The 2-story structure back there. And retro Maxine never hesitated. Well, that's the Sunday school annex. Church Growth Ira sourly said, that's our albatross. And Dee took a moment and then she said, we don't know yet. Exactly, I said. For now, we call it asset, and in time we'll call it resource. A month later, my family moved into the parsonage. There were posters around the church quoting me. Ministry is meeting needs in a context by applying human, financial, and other resources. The shift in thinking and action started that first summer when a church member spotted a classified ad offering a free hospital bed. She said, we have plenty of room to store it in that back building, the Albatross. 2 trustees roped in a couple of the retired non-church coffee buddies, and the 4 of them loaded that heavy old hand-cranked hospital bed into a pickup and lugged it down to the basement of Ira's Albatross. A week later, the town librarian broke her hip and her leg. The four-man squad dragged it back up and grumblingly took it and set it up for the librarian. That Sunday morning, we took a victory lap in the morning announcements at church, referring to it as our free community hospital equipment loan program. It now had a name. Word got out, made the newspaper, and the calls came in with area-wide donations of canes and crutches and walkers and shower seats and toilet seat extenders and a second hospital bed that was electric this time. And that basement room with canes and crutches hanging from all the walls looked like the exit door at the healing shrine at Lourdes. The downtown church that had been crippled and lame was now off and running. In mid-August, a few ladies rolled back the old retractable Sunday school walls, the folding walls, to start Secondhand Rose, a used clothing shop. It took off immediately, and it put ingenious, dedicated volunteers to work 3 afternoons a week, some active in the church, some friends of those people. College kids from Dartmouth College even brought in quality used clothing. The Albatross, now seen as an asset, became a resource. And then came September, the traditional start of the church's program year that mirrored the public school year. How do you suppose the church kicked it off? Yep, Retro Maxine organized a Sunday school sign-up and kickoff party, and she pressed her 2 single adult daughters into teaching a junior high class that would double as a youth group. Maxine's adult daughters enlisted this new minister's daughter and any other junior highs they could lure in. The first meeting saw 8 teens, but with the big box stores open on Sundays across the Connecticut River in West Lebanon, that group dwindled quickly to 4, including my captive daughter, Wendy. Maxine could not let go of her mantra, a good church needs a youth group, and held fast to her Polaroids in hopes that the 4-girl nucleus would magically attract 56 more through the next year or 2. Hope springs eternal. In October, the leaves fell, the cold weather arrived, and the numbers dropped off at the soup kitchen that had been set up in the downtown unheated shed behind the railroad station. Someone pointed out that our church was only a block away and we had a commercial kitchen and a dining room. We formed a coalition of local churches, created prep and serving teams that included our members and youth, and we brought the soup kitchen in from the cold. But it wasn't all church for me. Don't get that idea. The Upper Valley had a men's basketball league, 16 teams, games twice a week at the high school gym, referees, scoring clock, big crowds. This was the heyday of the Boston Celtics teams with Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, and Robert Parrish. Basketball fever infected all of New England. One team heard I had been a hot shot in the Navy, and they recruited me for its own Big Three. I joined Rich, a former Lebanon high school superstar turned golf pro, and this 26-year-old gym rat everyone called Wayne from Maine. Wayne from Maine had set Maine state scoring records and assist records in high school all 4 years. Which brings us to January. 6 months into my pastorate now. Wendy was in 8th grade, did well in school. She was popular. My wife and I had instilled 2 ideas in her. Question authority. That one will bite you. And if someone tells you the Bible says, your answer is no, you say the Bible says. We wanted a critical thinker and we got one. January called for a cheerleader sermon, a pat on the back piece of pulpit perfection. I made sure to include a sentence acknowledging Maxine's 2 adult daughters for their Herculean efforts and struggles to keep a youth group going. I don't know if it was for Maxine's sake or her daughter's sake or for my own need to show progress. As I said, several forces were at work here, but I had to claim it as a victory for the church. At the parsonage that morning, we were running late. I was eager to deliver that barn burner sermon, which is when, with my suit already on, I realized I had forgotten to shave my neck under my then big, heavy beard. So rather than strip to the waist, I took off my suit jacket, set it aside. I unbuttoned my white shirt down the front, I peeled it back toward my shoulders like Clark Kent changing into Superman in a phone booth. I dabbed on just a little shaving cream, and I took the razor in my always steady hand and looked at the man in the mirror. This shared bathroom stands between the master bedroom and our daughter's bedroom. The doors are those flimsy, hollow core doors that are kind of like balsa wood kite frame material with an air sandwich in between. Flimsy. So I'm facing the mirror, and to my right is the door to Wendy's room. And running late, the razor at my neck, I called through that door, "Wendy, you get dressed and are you ready to go?" And I heard, "I'm taking today off. Youth group is boring." I winced at her words, and I sliced open my tender neck skin. It stung, and in the steamy mirror, I could see bright red blood rivulets streaming down over my Adam's apple. My hands went to my neck, the motion causing the peeled back halves of my white shirt to flop inward like a pair of saloon doors closing. The shirt soaked up the blood like a battlefield bandage. My right hand dropped the razor and became an angry fist. I was like a pissed off Thor looking for a place to throw my hammer, anywhere. And before I knew it, my fist was wedged in the airspace of Wendy's hollow core door. I bellowed out, "Get dressed! The youth group is expecting you." My wife rushed to comfort Wendy, who had never seen such an outburst from her always calm father. I went into silent mode, put a Band-Aid on, and changed my bloody shirt. We three drove to church in silence. Preaching a feel-good, rah-rah sermon was difficult when I felt so angry at myself and so ashamed of my behavior. Where had this raging maniac come from? What forces, what pressures had turned Dr. Jekyll into Mr. Hyde? Right then, stuck in the middle of it, I didn't know. I was blind to it. And that afternoon, our undefeated men's basketball team had to play the league's other undefeated team. Normally, Wendy would have gone to watch me play, but like the two sides of that hollow core door, there was dead space between us. She stayed home. At the end of the third quarter, with the score close, Wayne from Maine went down. He left the game, which put pressure on the other two of us in the big three. I went up for a shot, and I am still convinced I got hammered, and the ref didn't call it. As I loped up court, I was about 185 pounds back then. I loped up court. I angrily yelled at the top of my lungs, "That's bullshit!" I don't know where all that bottled up fury came from, but the mild-mannered new minister in town had profaned the air of the high school gym in front of his own town and his own parishioners. Technical foul. I argued, and the other ref hit me with a second technical. That meant I had to leave not only the game, but the gym. I grabbed a towel and I headed to the locker room, head hung down. Wayne from Maine was there astride a long, hard bench like it was a horse. He had taped his swollen foot and ankle and was slipping it back into the sneaker. I didn't know if he was going home or back in the game. I draped my towel like a saddle blanket over the hard bench, and I sat down facing Wayne, ready to tell him about my outburst and getting ejected. The way we sat, facing each other on that bench between two banks of lockers on either side, made it look like an odd confessional. Except, of course, for the saturated air smelling of sweaty jocks and stinky socks and perspiration-soaked jerseys marinating inside those gym lockers. I didn't get to tell about being ejected because Wayne started telling me about his backwoods Maine father who drank too much, occasionally blacking Wayne's mother's eye. A frustrated basketball player himself, if he didn't think Wayne had given 110% in a game, he would apply a backhand or a belt to his son. Once Wayne finished high school, he left home, left Maine, and got a job in Vermont. "I go back once or twice a year for the holidays," Wayne said. "That's it. To see my mom, really, not so much my dad. In and out in a day." I, too, had grown up with an alcoholic, at times manipulative father, and I had left home at 18 for college and Navy and seminary. I told Wayne, "Funny, your dad pushed you. My father only went to my first high school game and then never again. I don't know why, but that hurt to not see him there. He didn't push me the way your father pushed you." And at my grandmother's funeral, a couple of Dad's bar buddies told me he bragged about all my games. He was proud, they said, but he never told me. And Wayne said, "My father's in Maine Medical Center. It doesn't look good." "Are you driving over?" I asked. It was a 4-hour drive. I just saw him and Mom at Christmas. He talked about old basketball games, and that was it. If I went now, what would we talk about? I nodded. I thought about my love-hate relationship with my own father and about my newly damaged relationship with my daughter. I didn't say, "Fathers are not perfect," or didn't say, "Hey, look on the bright side. Look at all the good things that came out of your relationship with your dad." Instead, I said something I had just read somewhere that stuck with me, not even my own original words or thoughts. I said, "You know, when you forgive somebody, it doesn't mean what they did was all right." Well, the light bulb went off inside my own head, and in that moment, I didn't know which side of the confessional I was on. Wayne nodded as if he had heard something hopeful or helpful, and he said, "Thanks," and he grabbed his bag and he left. When I got home, I went directly to Wendy's room, where she was doing homework. I sat down, and with hot tears of shame and regret, I apologized. Not just for my physical outburst or my bullying behavior, but for the way I had treated her. I acted like you were an extension of myself, not a separate person. I laid on you the responsibility for the youth group's success, which would please Maxine and the church and make me look good. I was blind to the fact that I was using you. The youth group wasn't what you needed, it's what I needed. I asked her to forgive me, and she did, and she hugged me. Youth group hung in until Easter. They got their candy, and they faded. Wendy and her girlfriends became the core of the school's girls' basketball team. The church did innovative things the next 4 years. Undie Sunday for low-income kids, free hairdresser and makeup day. At the peak of the Pol Pot regime in the killing fields, we relocated, housed, and fed several Cambodian families. We originated the Vermont cow flop drop and cow chip toss to raise funds for a new steeple. We rented low-cost space in our Albatross building for a preschool with special needs kids. We installed a 3-stop passenger elevator between our dining room and our sanctuary with a stop in between at the street level. And on Christmas Eve in 1987, with local news crews filming, we watched a crane set a brand new steeple on the church, like placing a tiny foil star atop a Christmas tree. In the dedication service, Sourpuss Ira joked, "No longer topless in public." What I remember from those 5 years, from that Sunday in January really, isn't my rah-rah sermon about church transformation. No, not about accomplishments. What I remember is listening to Wayne talk about his father on a hard bench in a sweaty locker room, seeing him defy his invisible father by not going back in that basketball game on a sprained ankle to gut it out, but then going back into the bigger game by driving to Maine Medical that night to say goodbye. I remember that night standing like a beggar with hat in hand at Wendy's bedroom door, asking her forgiveness for something I could not do on my own, could not undo on my own. I cried hot tears of shame, and I acknowledged my sin, and I received forgiveness that she was not required to give. Neither of that day's little things grew that church a bit, but they grew me, and the latter grew our father-daughter relationship. Little things are not small things, not insignificant things. The little things matter.